Attention all subjects. Do you see something strange in the neighborhood? Who are you going to call? Not the Warlord, he's conquering something again. Orcs rampaging, undead not being dead. Goblins being pricks. Yeah, call some mercenaries. Affordable depending on the job, you can be guaranteed success, or failure, and then you can deal with it by your lowborn self. Word of warning, the Warlord is not responsible for any failure in any contract signed by said parties. The Warlord is also not responsible for any lose of life, property, or money. Ha, suck it. Anyways, with that out of the way, will you all please shut the fuck up and listen to his latest broadcast on a thing he has conquered? And have a nice day.
So, as you can see being broadcasted to my subject's brains and eyeballs, this is not Jagged Alliance, though definitely worth looking into in the future, nor Mercenary's Playground of Destruction, another worthy conquest in the future. This is Battle Brothers, a role-playing turn-based tactics game where you control a band of Germans in a low-fantasy Pangaea and kill plenty of your fellow men, as well as some orcs, zombies and undead Romano-Celts, and die a hell of a lot more than succeeding. Heavily inspired by Glenn Cook's Black Company and games like XCOM, Mountain Blade, this is a grim no-fantasy game despite the spectacular artwork and the Glenn Cook style of writing that I just adore. Produced by indie German developers Overhype Games. The game was officially released on March 24, 2017, originally for Windows PCs, before being later released on most modern systems. But originally, this game was in early access and went through a hell of a lot of changes before becoming what the game is known for today. Then, more stuff would be added, with 4 DLCs being released between 2018 and 2022, adding more special encounters, monsters, banners, weapons, and enemies to kill. And what did the large convulsing masses think of this game? A large collective...
Yes, I like this.
But the main positives come from the high-risk, high-reward gameplay, the attention to detail with its mechanics, the artwork, the orgasmic soundtrack, the replayability and the randomness of each session you do, and the fact people always come back to the game despite the ass-whooping this game tends to dish out. This is a sleeper hit for sure, but this comes at a price of this game not being for everyone, especially those with short attention spans or easily riled to anger. This game is brutal. You will lose men or half your army, as this is a roguelike with some RNG thrown in as well. Wave goodbye to your most experienced troopers. Mostly it's the difficulty, the rather large world with lots of nothing between moments of action. But there's more to it than this, but that's later. Personally, I never heard of this game until around September 2020. Looking through the GOG marketplace, I came across this, the artwork to be exact, just grabbing my attention with its heroic depiction of soldiers slaying the most racially diverse army of evil I've ever seen. Full of wizards, undead, orcs, goblins, and an unfortunate hiver. Played it all the way through near enough every day until I finished my first run as the Bloody Rascals Company. And I loved it. Spoilers. Considering that it was my first run as well, and I didn't know what to fully expect, it hooked me immediately just by its sheer presentation. And I have played it on and off more or less ever since then. Still loving it. Until the game decides to hate me and screw off my progression. But that was 4 years ago, surely some of my opinions have changed under my more judgmental eye. So, my fellow convulsing masses known as my subjects, you know what the main questions are by now? Is this game worthy of your time and hard-earned groschens? All 25 pieces of it. And should you give this a go over more established tactical game series? Well, let's go commit some war-related funsies on trade caravans. If you see a necromancer, kill him, quickly, or you're going to see too many new friends from the other side. Now, let us all sit down, relax, and kindly shut the fuck up as the Warlord discusses a truly great tactics game, that of Battle Brothers. So as soon as you boot up Battle Brothers for the first time, you are blessed twice by the game's artwork and the magnificent Battle Brothers menu theme. A song that conveys the many feelings you'll possibly get: heroic, menace, tragedy, foreboding, and inspiration all rolled into one. And with the simple menu to navigate, you pretty much have two options: a new game to start your game, and a scenario mode where you fight in a battle against certain foes with certain levels of gear. So unless you need to tweak your game's visuals, which to be fair was never needed, time to form your mercenary company. First, choose your origins. Though at first it may not mean anything, look closer. Increasing in difficulty from top to bottom, each origins provides several benefits, disadvantages, and some interesting twists to each session. From being only able to hire peasants, lower inventory space, outright hostile factions, or even avatar characters you must keep alive at all costs. Then choose your banner and name. For the Warlord's company, using his many monies and treasures gained from past adventures, acquired 3 exceptional past soldiers and created a new band of sellswords worthy of respect and dubiously gained money. The Warlords. because I'm so fucking creative. Then a few final touches to your game, what endgame crisis you would end up fighting, the amount of money you'd start off with, and the difficulty of your foes, as well as some zanier options like permanent settlements destruction and no save scumming options. Truly sadistic, but I know some people enjoy that kind of thing. Anyway, with all that's done, and your preferences chosen, let's begin. And as you start, the world opens to you, and it's visually gorgeous, with the visuals looking like something from a fairy tale and more happier scenes. Then alongside that, it's presented alongside others that wouldn't look too far out of place from Black Company art or The Witcher. A vast Pangean landscape of varying climates with the frozen and mountainous north, whilst getting more carboniferous with vast forests and swamps in the temperate middle, before drying up to deserts and wide savannas further south. You may notice low-lying clouds in the periphery. Be careful if you decide to delve into it, for who knows what horrors dwell within. Also randomized, thanks RNG. But before you ask, no, the continent is near enough remains the same, never changing in shape or geographical layout. It always remains near Pangean. But whilst the landscape is beautiful and diverse in appearance, never making the long journeys too boring to look at. You'll need places to sell your loot, gain troops, and dungeons to kill bad guys and encounters that make you go ooh and ah, then regret your decision after being decimated. And again, for the most part, these random encounters are usually the most difficult. Like pins added to a map, you'll find friendly, or hostile, settlements from sleepy villages, cosmopolitan cities, and mighty citadels, with each settlement under the control of 3 human factions. Those being the noble houses of the north, heavily inspired from medieval Germany due to its bleak colour scheme, knights in shining armour, and a clear feudal hierarchy of haves and have-nots. And then to the south, the southern city-states, being heavily inspired from the Arabian Caliphates and medieval Persia, screaming opulence with striking regal colours of a rich hive of trade and sciences and hedonism, yet an underlying sense of superiority, corruption, and dizzying decadence can be seen. Each settlement also has additional add-ons which gives each settlement a sense of being and relevance in the world, like mines, breweries, militia barracks, and watchtowers, and the occasional ruin from past tragedies. Yet a possible job in the future, and whilst out there in the big wide world you'll find many ruins housing either human or monstrous horrors. Some special encounters that stand out on the map considerably, and enemy camps that continuously spawn enemy armies unless you go and wipe out their camps and take their things. Yeah, this land is populated by more than just clusters of buildings and nature, for man and a menagerie of creatures also dwell within it. While I say man, they are more chest pawns shaped into humans with distinct faces, armour and weapon models attached to them. Quite a neat touch for tactical games. And adds each soldier you have with their own appearance as well as the enemy. Speaking of appearances, these are some ugly Germans, with faces that a mother would love, to doing your business backwards, to simply not giving a fuck. Each character randomly generated uses several templates that are accessible via the barbers, so expect lots of similar looking or rather bland looking soldiers with similar names and awful haircuts. Do yourself a favour and go to the barbers and change your soldiers to your liking, or more to their characters' traits, it's too being random, with unusual barber services like body morphing, hair and face transplanting, and a tattoo parlour. Same can't be said for the monsters and beasts you'll find out there in the land. No customization for them, the only options being getting killed or killing them, rather visceral combat. As your soldiers and enemies take damage or hits, you will notice the armour beginning to tear, armour dent and barely hang on by a thread. Then as health is lost, scratches appear alongside bruises, blood, lacerations and a more ragged appearance. Then as you, or they, die, besides going limp on the floor, they get decapitated or have caved in heads. Yet combat in this game is depicted as visceral and brutal, very fitting for the grim low fantasy setting and harsh difficulty of the game. Anyways, monsters. Keeping up with the low fantasy setting, when the fantasy element is encountered, usually far away from civilization, the creatures, monsters and special zones come off as something wild, supernatural, something ancient and unfathomably evil that should be burned then buried so it can never raise its ugly head ever again. You'll have beasts to slay, which are larger than life animals such as hyenas, direwolves, spiders and snakes. But as the creatures become more fantastical, they can look like the stuff of nightmares and have the stats and abilities that make them a nightmare to fight and defeat. All those are swept away as the crisis monsters would bring about the end of your world. The savage tribalistic orcs, the sneaky goblins that love ghillie suits and make you wonder why the bushes are speaking goblin, and the ancient undead. Think the Tomb Kings but Roman with a Celtic twist, that fights in the Macedonian phalanx. They are awesome to see, not fun to fight. But overall, by the gods I've talked way too long on the visuals, it's beautiful with that dark twist. The map is beautiful even if the continent never really changes. The characters are okay, but with plenty of options to shape them into their wilder selves. And the monsters are stellar, strikingly more feral and dangerous, adding to their dread factor in this low fantasy setting, especially once the wounds begin to show up in a losing fight. So yeah, the visuals are fantastic. Now that that's out of the way, let's discuss sound. I like the sounds of that. Speaking of sound, so, the soundscape. Apart from the music, it is usually an overlooked segment, but in this game it should never be overlooked, for it adds to the fantastic presentation of Battle Brothers. The soundscape is immaculate, not the voice acting, for there is none, barring the screaming, the gargling and the grunting of casualties. Everything about the soundscape is meticulously crafted for its intended purpose, right down to the most minute detail. The sound of the weapons have a unique sound cue depending on its size and type. The shield parries, knife stabs, the failed javelin throw, and the sound of the armor hit is unique depending on the armor used. Inventory management also comes with sound cues as you move the items around in a near OCD manner as you keep your weapons, armor, food and trade items in their respective sections. And the barking acknowledgement of the dog as you move it around. And of course, there's the monsters with their own sound library of guttural growls, screams and incoherent gibberish. The beasts have the growls and roars that add to their feral and fearsome reputation, though each creature has its own repertoire of sounds. The monsters, on the other hand, sound more nightmarish, more the case as they get progressively more powerful. As stated before, the soundscape of the monsters add a greater threat factor to making them more feared. Further added to the game's superb presentation and detail, but also makes the monsters that are usually just XP grinds to kill in other universes a truly substantial threat. Yeah, the soundscape so far is fantastic. Could it get any better? Holy fuck, it gets better with the music. Produced by German composers known as Breakdown Epiphanies, the music is just... what's the best way to describe it?
Yes! Yes! Yes!
Yeah, it's orgasmically good.
Holy shit!
This is the kind of soundtrack that the Warlord adores and loves. One that augments a location, a situation, the villains and adds more to what you can see without telling, as well as being utterly unique from other games with great effort and passion put into the soundtrack. For me, I think of Mark Morgan's classic Fallout soundtracks and the classic Resident Evils, mostly Nemesis, whenever I hear the music for this game. It's definitely within that hallowed library of soundtracks. So yeah, this is one of my favourite soundtracks from recent games, utilising orchestra pieces like violins, cellos, drums, choir and the occasional guitar. The soundtrack diverts more as you venture north and you hear what seems like Norse-inspired chanting, Or to the south and hear a more Arabian-inspired soundtrack that adds to the mystique and opulence of the southern lands, including oods and nays. This soundtrack is fantastic in conveying a large variety of emotions for any situation you'll be in and heightens a sense of dread in others. Even the opening theme does this, a sense of heroism, yet it's tainted by a more melancholic dread and a slight sense of sadness. There's also a sense of wonderment and adventure as you journey from contract to contract, though originally it sounded a bit more melancholy, yet heroic, almost something out of Lord of the Rings. And then when you finally stop in a nearby village or large town, a sense of relief and downtime is added with a soothing guitar solo or violin track as you gather the needed supplies, conscript the drabs of society, and down a few beers with the boys before venturing once more. But then there's the castles, and the tone becomes more martial and heroic as your soldiers enter a place of military readiness, martial discipline, and a place to get some of the best weapons and armour that can turn your men from a rabble of scavenger brigands to something more professional. Then there's the battle music, and by the gods, it just gets better and better. It's fan-fucking-tastic. And like the world map, it augments the situations perfectly and gives the enemy a presence in both in sound and appearance. It makes the orcs sound like a nigh unstoppable force of nature. The undead, a terror of the night. peasants horrible, yet a necessary evil? And fighting bandits almost a chore. Speaking of thugs and brigands, there's this track called Thug Life. Firstly, great name to a song. Secondly, the track just carries the battle, making it sound something like you'd hear in a tavern brawl, yet also sounds indecisive, for the battle could go in any direction. Anyways, I could go on for longer on the Soundscape, but I've got more things to discuss. To conclude things as quickly as possible, the Soundscape is fantastic, adding more to the fantastic presentation and attention to detail. The sound effects, crisp and adds impact and unearthly terror. The voice acting, deathly, then quiet. And the music, love it to pieces, one of the all-time greats. There, done. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk gameplay. So, the gameplay of this game. Mostly, as you all probably have seen from the broadcast by now, is a turn-based tactical combat game using the D100 combat system for combat roles, with added role-playing elements, resource managing and a brutal roguelike difficulty and RNG that can make some fights either unfair or pushovers. After that, it opens to a world map where you click your troops around to any place you see on the map and find refuge in nearby towns and fortresses and get the necessary things needed to keep your company going, from food, armor, weapons and ammo, and some alcohol, or seek a fight from the many roaming enemies, sometimes being a plethora completely ignoring you or chasing you to the ends of the earth. Obviously, for your company of soldiers, your main goal is to make fat stacks of money by completing contracts from a menagerie of settlements, caravan escorts, being the postman, destroying enemies and their camps, patrols, hunting monsters, lifting sieges, exploring, or a mixture of both, and gain a reputation that opens more lucrative yet more difficult jobs in the future. But there are other ways to make some money, for this is also an open world sandbox more akin to that of Mountain Blade. Destroying enemy camps, trading in valuable goods, raiding caravans or settlements, there's plenty of ways to make a quick buck. Just be careful, piss off people too much and they'll send bounty hunters or militias after you, or nobles send their troops to end you. Pretty simple, right?
No!
There are always checks, balances and the cursed RNG that keeps the game from being too easy. Everything connects that can make or break your company and their performance. No, this game is difficult, and not just in the combat. Even in the rather mundane arena of morale and supplies, these must be watched. Money, food, tools, ammunition and medicine. Without one or any of them, troops won't heal as effectively, there won't be any arrows or bolts to use in battle, your armour and weapons won't be repaired to their maximum extent, and with no food or money, the troops' morale will drop to the point of desertion. Morale is another major resource to watch out for. Every session will have moments or events that can shake or strengthen your troops. Death of comrades, random events, enemy abilities, or you making the wrong choice can damage their morale. But those checks and balances can work in your favour too, both in stats and in combat. So fulfilling objectives, killing confident enemies, which is notified by the icon, this blue banner thing, downing some booze with the boys and using certain abilities, drink responsibly. Besides the RNG, every unit has abilities and stats that at first seems unimportant for first time players, but over time as you upgrade your soldiers, you'll be keeping an eye on those stats and traits, as some are just important and sometimes overpowered, like at the Executioner and the Colossus traits. They are so overpowered yet so necessary. This is where the RPG elements of the game is most dominant, barring the choices you can make out there in the world with some fantastic writing and artwork to boot. Your soldiers have 5 important stats you need to keep an eye on: health, resolve, movement, and melee and ranged attack and defense. But you also have a few more, but they are more impacted by your equipped armor and weapons, randomized critical chance, and the likelihood of being spotted in certain terrain. And as each soldier is random in appearance, background story, each potential recruit has different stats and favored ones highlighted by stars, making you consider their weapon layout and role in the company. Though at times, or manpower emergencies, or just laziness, they're going to be getting the spear and shield regardless. But if the gods aren't smiling at you in a fight, but they are lucky enough to not die, your soldiers will gain injuries, temporary or permanent, when being knocked out in battle. Besides looking more horrendous, each injury adds a debuff to one of your soldiers. Let it heal over time or visit a local temple, but permanent injuries are just that. Permanent. And they can stack, almost to the point of making your crippled soldier barely effective in battle. Sometimes the most humane thing to do is to let them go. Just be sure to pay them, or they'll be hell to pay. Speaking of spears and shields, there is a good number of weapons, visually speaking, that you and your enemies and your troops will be using, and each weapon has their own strengths, weaknesses, and their own skills to be utilised in battle, but due to RNG and the enemy's strengths, each weapon is best used against certain types of enemies. But remember this, your foes have these too, and as stated before, everything connects with your armour and weapons. Pun not intended. No weapon is better or worse, each one is effective against different armours and enemy types and builds and situations, augmented further by their traits or skills later. If anything, it is best advised that you have at least one of each weapon type within your company. But not every weapon requires you to enter someone else's personal space. Sometimes you have the choice to throw or shoot things at people, the most honourable way of warfare. Bows and crossbows are the most common ranged weapons you'll find, with more powerful versions sometimes requiring a full turn to reload a shot, but for greater chances at a hit, park your archer on a hill terrain and snipe the enemy to kingdom come. But whose attack plans are you foiling or falling into? For the most part, your fellow man. To quickly note, the enemy levels up via tiers, having access to higher stats, skills, perks and better weapons and armour as they level up, some of them being unique. This goes for all hostiles, from lowly peasants and poorly armed militias, rough and armed with hand-me-down geared brigands, feral barbarians, and the uniformed juggernaut armies of the noble houses and southern city-states. Sometimes in their armies, they'll, and you, can have war dogs, fantastic in fighting beasts and routing soldiers. It's just I hate fighting them, for obvious reasons. I love doggies. Though they are your fellow man, each faction tends to fight in a different manner. They may skirmish, rely on heavy weapons, or a shield wall. They'll die eventually, or you bitch out and retreat. A viable tactic actually. Then things get more difficult with the monsters and beasts. They can hit harder, move further, withstand more damage, and break your troops without a claw swipe. There are many your brothers will kill or be killed by, though there are those worthy of attention. Nazarers can gain health by eating their own dead and go up a tier, then they eat one of your soldiers whole, losing valuable gear and a potential trooper. Seriously, that's fucked up. Kill it before he becomes poop. Zombies don't sound like much, but they can take a considerable effort to take down and can knacker your own in a protracted fight. Make sure to not get bitten, otherwise you'll be putting down a familiar face. Hexes can charm soldiers against you, and also turn to a sexy lady if that fails.
She's a bitch!
If that fails, they can curse them instead. Careful, for if you kill the witch, the cursed brother will lose health or their life. Alps and Necrosavants.
Oh, fuck you! You're grounded!
Teleporting around to the weakest soldier, hitting them with the force of a truck as well as being difficult to hit, and regaining health per successful, for the Necrosavants, hit, and being difficult to kill and hit in the turn, fuck them. And a Lindworm too. Two separate parts to kill, but with acidic blood that burns your soldiers if you get a hit, and a poisonous stinger as well. You best be prepared when fighting this titan. But despite everything and the shit ton I've talked about the stats, role-playing and the enemies, the gameplay works perfectly, even if it is utterly bullshit at times. Everything just works to a T, with everything having its assorted place and every weapon feeling useful, added to the game's fantastic presentation without any crashes or technical fuck-ups. This game is challenging yet equally as fair. It's also one of the few games that makes the orcs undead actually feel like substantial threats that need to be treated with such respect. But like all things, with the good there is the bad. And Battle Brothers, despite the gushing approval I've given it, this game is not for everyone, especially for those with a low anger threshold. Besides the difficulty that can change with a snap of a finger, RNG has an effect as well, from repeated character descriptions, but the sudden change of difficulty in battles from extremely unfair only for a restart to change it to a simple pushover fight. And in some quests, no fighting happens at all, even when dozens of enemy warbands just waltz around nearby. And on top of that, there is a lot of walking with sometimes near nothing around you happening. Despite the many battles you will partake in, the battlefields barely change in layout, from open fields, swamps, forests, tundra wastelands, and deserts, though each map has certain terrain, differences. Hills, bushes to hide in, bring the occasional camps to block your line of sight or funnel your advance. Though tactical variety is assured, there is just no variety in layout. There's no dungeons, city battles, or sieges, just field battles with maybe a few occasional side objectives. And finally, there is a feature for your company called followers. Though you don't see them in the game, they provide honestly incredible benefits to your mercenary band, like being able to pay less money to your troops, which is really good for wages, reduce food consumption, increased line of sight, travel speed, and so on. But they are so fucking expensive. And as your company gets larger and more experienced, these followers become near next to useless. But overall, I love this game despite the challenge and some utterly bullshit situations the game can throw at you. Now I've talked way too much into the gameplay, for there is a lot of stuff within the game the Warlord has to convey to you peasants. But now that that's out of the way, let's tell you a story. 3 of them. Story time, my fellow subjects. It's story time, my fellow subjects. A story of bloodshed, shared glory, utter bullshit moments, and tragic losses of those we grew to care about. Probably. These stories are unique for each session, besides the rebuild the company origin, for there is no overall story. Each story is their own, with their own actions, identity, and moments that shape the character and actions of your company. So, for the first time, the Warlord has 3 different stories to share with my relatively large collective of subjects. And no spoilers! So go on, listen to them. Yeah, it's time to tell a story. 3 of them. This is the saddest tale of the 3. Starting its existence as a militia out of Birkenstrand, hired by the local lord as nothing more than cannon fodder, they fled the field and swore to never again allow some blue blood to command them, nor have any in their own new company. That of the many bastards even came with a cool banner. Look out world, here come the peasants. Some didn't want to be in it, and one was armed with a loot. But there is a quality in quantity. With the company assembled, they took their first job. Destroy a bandit camp in a ruined castle a half-day's march from Birkenstrand. With shaky confidence and hand-me-down weapons, the lads went into their first fight. It was a slaughter. More a drunken brawl between a group of ragged peasants than a battle between 2 trained armies, which it rightfully is, with half the many bastards killed. But the bastards won anyway, at a massive cost, both as a group and for their future. It began with the 2 desertions as the mangled gang limped back home, reducing the manpower from 5 to 3. Getting painted with no more work at home, the not so many bastards left for the nearby city of Soltkai. There they hired 2 more for the company and took some more work. The first was to remove squatters from a nearby ruin in need of renovation, but almost like seeing kin, and because I didn't have enough strength to fight anyway, they left them alone. Oh well, maybe another job would work. And it did. They hired themselves out as caravan guards for a trader heading towards Koningsmunde, 2 days southeast. Easy enough, until a small orc raiding party led by a berserker ambushed the caravan. They fought them barely, they fought like shit, and out on the plains they killed 2 at least, berserker included. But the many bastards were reduced again as 3 bastards were killed, forced to retreat as the orcs had their way with the survivors. But having failed another job, and Soltkai hating those slackers now, the rest of the bastards proceeded to Koningsmunde, desperate for money, hiring another down-on-his-luck adventurer to get at least a modicum of strength back. And strapped for cash, the many bastards took another job, not knowing it was their last. Kill a bunch of brigands and retrieve a talisman for the mayor, and off they went. A band of 4 against 7. The fight could have gone any way, but gradually, slowly, and painfully, the bastards were cut down to a man. At least 3 of the bastards went down, and the brigands. The many bastards became no more bastards. In the bleak northern tundra, a small band of barbarians, unusually accompanied by a monk, make a trip to the south. Convinced by Engelbert to abandon the old ways of raiding and finding greater riches from mercenary work in the south, Jotnar, Rangvald and Brand, with Engelbert, would leave their homeland. Not that they had much of a choice, for most of the northern houses and settlements resent them for, reasons. Oh well, by the will of the old gods, these bloodthirsty bastards shall find their fortune. These bastards blessing themselves as the old god's wrath. Though a developed mercenary band, some things can never be reformed. They see a caravan, bad things tend to happen. Much to Engelbert's disapproval, staying out of these raids. Spoils for the old gods at least. But the south did prove to be a treasure trove of opportunities and a new home for the Wrath, as House Berengar and the southern city-state had plenty of contracts for bloodthirsty soldiers like them, especially for the Wrath's speciality of killing. Brigands, orcs, the undead, all those fuckers from House Armsburg, they die all the same, alongside the occasional caravan. Contract be damned, those caravans must die, and its loot liberated. And as the days passed, the mercenary band became something of a tribe, with its own traditions and menagerie of individuals worthy of song and conflict. When a new member is accepted into the band, they are simply given their weapons and armor per their skills. But once they have achieved glorious kills, they have the right to wear war paint like their founders. Scars, war paint, effigies, all were accepted. Many members of the Wrath had their own stories. Jotnar became the last of the original barbarian founders, later becoming known as the Old Breed among the men. He became something of a father figure and a living symbol of the northern clans in its martial strength, being the company's best shock trooper and sending heads a-flying. Engelbert, ironically, became something of an officer, carrying the banner into battle, and became the proud owner of the company's war dog, Thor. Even though calling themselves the Old God's Wrath, the company had the devil's luck in their early days, with nary a scratch or death, even if outnumbered or facing the most terrible of foes. Ulfert became Davkol's prophet to the company, though being a vicious warrior in his own right. Yet his greatest legacy was Gerald, a former farmer, becoming Davkol's most ardent missionary, resurrecting Otwin the Sacrifice to the company's service. Ironically, the Sacrifice still lives on as one of the best frontliners, and even in the south under the Gilder's light, a brother was found within a fellow nomad, Zawahir, an exceptional spearman down in even the most terrible of foes. It's a shame he is such a pessimistic prick. That's why the men simply call him Shut Up, and during the company's 144 days of adventure, there were many moments that shaped the Wrath, but it was the noble civil war that shaped the company the most. The Wrath found a naturally reliable employer within House Berengar. Strengthened further by past contracts, Berengar had the attack dogs needed for the upcoming noble spat. The Wrath had a simple goal: make life a living hell for Houses Armsburg and Wilmsburg. Not a problem. Raiding, sabotaging the war effort, and destroying patrols. The Wrath even went back home to the north. Everything seemed to have gone full circle, except the tribe is larger and they are donning some nice gear to boot. But everything culminated in a final battle. A battle which people would eventually call the Battle of the Ancient Cairns. Quite an apt name considering what happened. The Wrath and Berengar under Sir Lambert faced off with the armies of Armsburg led by a brute known as Lord Liebrich. Nothing fancy or honourable in this fight, just a straightforward and vicious battle. No prisoners taken or expected. Many went down on both sides, but Liebrich led the charge and took several of the Wrath's brothers. But under combined efforts, revenge was served as Liebrich was slain, and the Armsburg host was routed regardless of this. But the cost was heavy. Half of the company was slain, including Jotnar, the last echo of the barbarian past. But the war, in all efforts, was won for House Berengar. And from this war, the Old God's Wrath legend was born from bloodshed. And a new chapter begins, a primal rage blessed with the Old God's divine purpose. Even if the purpose is to kill for cold hard cash. So what about the Warlords? As for them, they were founded via donations from a generous benefactor. Starting off as a band of 3 former soldiers who fought in the Shield Wall together, the Warlords would grow over time as more soldiers of fortune took a chance within the company, filling the rank and file with a menagerie of characters, each as bizarre as the rest. In the coming days, the Warlords would lay a bloody swath of many an enemy that were contractually obliged to die for the financial benefit of the company. If not that, then they became heavily armed postmen, or guard for the Merchants Guild. Lives were taken, both brother and foe, and new blood would be added with every visit to a nearby settlement, filled with fools or desperate souls looking for a new chance, or a quick buck. But the truest test for the company came with the Greenskin invasion. emerging as a tide of violence from the no man's land of the east. An alliance of orcs and goblins would bring death and destruction to the lands of man not seen since the Battle of Many Names many years ago. Little did the Greenskins know that the Warlords would make things much more difficult for them, sending them back to whatever barbaric god shat them out onto the land. This war would be a vicious attritional one, defeating orc raids that seem to appear everywhere, camp destructions of goblins and defending villagers from the ravenous orcs. This war was vicious, with many a brother killed or maimed by the orc menace. But despite the violence and the never-ending fighting, the tide turned for the forces of man with the Great Battle of Vardagard. The combined forces of the North and the Warlords would attack the siege lines of the Greenskins, dispatching the horde outside of the walls of the fort, before destroying the siege engines and slaying those guarding it, breaking the siege. The only one of this war. This was not the coup de grace, if anything. The horde anticlimactically fell apart from the relentless onslaught of the forces of man, with the Warlords destroying one last camp on the Bold Crown Mountains prior to the war's end. And as if like a sign of victory, prior to the camp destruction, the Warlords would find the Golden Goose. Nice. But the war was won, and the legacy of the Warlords was secured, perhaps being the one thing that turned the tide of the Great Greenskin War. But their story was over. But the company endures onwards. And those are just 3 of many stories that could happen in Battle Brothers. Some may be successful, others tragic failures, but each story is truly unique, with erstwhile unique soldiers and events that can shape its story. But these are the stories the Warlord wished to tell for all to remember, and perhaps tell others. Anyway, let's get this thing finished. And that, my many and possibly duplicated subjects, is my latest broadcast of Battle Brothers. And I love it, even if the game has a bipolar tendency of 1 second being a very relaxed and tranquil, to suddenly making your sessions a nightmare run full of death and tragic loss. The graphics are both beautiful and feral, with the humans, monsters, the settlements and the illustrative artwork looking like something out of an old fairy tale book, whilst also having a hard edge to them, even if it gets repetitive as many of the assets are reused several times. The soundscape is a work of art, with weapon strikes and death throws of your enemies making combat, even if turn-based, a visceral affair. And the music? It's orgasmic and is one of the Warlord's favourites. He listens to it outside of conquering this bloody landscape, and the gameplay is near perfect, even with the steep learning curve, some missions being rather uneventful and the sheer randomness that can occur. Every action must be thought of, every weapon has a purpose, the terrain can hinder or enhance your chances of success, and sometimes there is nothing with simply falling back and telling your employer to suck it. As the game stated many times, failure is fun. Kind of. So do I recommend it? Yes! But, and a big fat but, this game is not for everyone. Most obviously why is the difficulty that can be seen by many as unfair and utterly random, as stated before. But beyond that, the game is fantastic. Beautiful and visceral visuals, the amazing soundscape, simple to learn yet hard to master gameplay that can change every time you play, and the many stories each session can bring. Then add the many mods available with fixes, adding game modes and scenarios. This game is theoretically infinitely replayable. So yeah, get this game, even at full price, for Overhype Studios deserves it. And with a new game on the way with a more sci-fi aesthetic, combined with the great characterization of Battle Brothers, let's say the Warlord is indeed hyped for this game. Looking forward to Space Battle Bros. Menace. And that is my latest broadcast of Battle Brothers. I hope you enjoyed this latest Conquest, and please stay tuned for future broadcasts, either by liking and subscribing or checking my Facebook Satrapy, or both. As for next time, I've seen enough death of friends and foes for a while, so as a cure for this melancholy, I'm returning to my favourite pastime for a little while, of driving carbon combustion machines around in circles several times. Yeah, motor racing, but which racing league, for there are many. So until next time, this is the Warlord signing out.